The reunion invitation sat on David Peterson's kitchen table for 3 weeks before he decided to attend. Rosewood High School, class of 1980, 44th reunion, June 14, 2024. The invitation included a special note. Mr. Peterson, as our former principal, you are our guest of honor. Please join us to celebrate the legacy you built. Peterson, 68 years old now, retired for 6 years, stared at the invitation with trembling hands. Legacy. That word haunted him, because his legacy wasn't the scholarships he'd established or the students he'd mentored. His legacy was Amy Richardson, 17 years old, honor student, class of 1981. The girl he'd killed in May 1980 when she threatened to report him for inappropriate behavior. The girl whose body he'd hidden in Cascade Forest. The girl whose student ID he'd been carrying in his wallet for 44 years, behind his driver's license, where he saw her face every single day. He would never make it to that reunion. Because at exactly 7:23 a.m. on June 12, 2024, 2 days before the scheduled celebration, Detective Michael Santos stood outside Peterson's modest ranch house in Rosewood, Oregon, population 6,800 West, with a DNA match report that connected Peterson to chewing gum found at the crime scene 44 years earlier. Behind Santos, 5 tactical officers waited in unmarked vehicles, preparing to arrest a man who'd spent 4 decades being trusted with children while hiding murder. Peterson emerged from his house in khaki pants and a Rosewood High School sweatshirt, coffee mug in hand, completely unaware that forensic genetic genealogy had just destroyed the life he'd spent 44 years building. He saw the vehicles, the officers, the grim expressions. His coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the porch steps, liquid spreading across concrete, like the blood that had been on his hands 44 years ago. "David Peterson?" Santos called out, badge held high. Peterson's legs buckled. He grabbed the porch railing, white-knuckled, gasping. "You're here about Amy Richardson." It wasn't a question. Santos's jaw tightened. "David Peterson, you're under arrest for the murder of Amy Richardson." Peterson's knees gave out completely. He collapsed onto the porch steps, hands trembling violently, breath coming in ragged gasps. "Amy," he whispered, then louder, voice breaking. "God, Amy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Officers moved forward. Chen caught Peterson's arm, helped him upright. "I knew this day would come," Peterson gasped, tears streaming down his face. "I've been waiting 44 years. I thought maybe I'd die first. Maybe I'd get away with it. But you found me. You finally found me." As officers secured the handcuffs, something fell from Peterson's shirt pocket. A photograph, edges worn from years of handling, fluttered to the porch. Santos picked it up. Amy Richardson's senior portrait. She would have graduated in 1981, would have turned 61 this year, but she never made it past 17. Santos looked up at Peterson, rage barely contained. "You've been carrying her picture." Peterson nodded, unable to speak through the sobs shaking his frame. Officers searched his wallet during the booking process. Behind his driver's license, laminated and worn from constant handling, they found Amy Richardson's student ID from 1980, the one that had been reported missing from her jacket when it was found in the forest. Santos held it up. "You kept her ID for 44 years. Every time you opened your wallet, you saw her face." Peterson's voice was barely audible. "I couldn't throw it away. It was the only piece of her I had left, the only proof she was real, that I'd really done it. 17 years old forever. Because of me." Across the street, neighbors began emerging. Mrs. Chen, whose grandson Peterson had tutored in math every Tuesday for 2 years. The Martinez family, whose daughter Peterson had written college recommendation letters for. The Johnsons, who'd invited Peterson to every barbecue for a decade. Mrs. Chen ran forward as officers guided Peterson toward the patrol car. "Mr. Peterson." David, tell them there's a mistake." Peterson stopped, looked at her, at the woman whose family had trusted him with their children's education, their futures. "There's no mistake, Helen," he said quietly, voice shaking. "I killed Amy Richardson in 1980. I buried her in the forest. I've been lying to all of you for 44 years. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to everyone." Mrs. Chen's face went white. She stumbled backward. Her husband caught her. And Peterson watched, seeing in real time the destruction of trust he'd spent 44 years building. One student, one family, one scholarship at a time. As the patrol car door closed, Peterson collapsed forward, forehead hitting the metal grate, and the sound that came from his throat was raw and broken. Not the sound of an innocent man wrongly accused. The sound of a guilty man who'd carried his secret for 44 years and finally, impossibly, been caught. By 8 a.m., Rosewood, Oregon was waking to news that would shatter 44 years of trust. To understand how David Peterson lived free for nearly half a century, while Amy Richardson's family waited for answers, you have to go back to a May night in 1980, when Rosewood was a town where high school dances ended at 10 p.m. and everyone walked home safely. Or so they thought. Amy Marie Richardson was 17 years old on May 16, 1980, a junior at Rosewood High School with straight A's, captain of the debate team, and plans to study law at University of Oregon. She had chestnut brown hair she wore in a ponytail, freckles across her nose, and a laugh that carried through hallways. She was the kind of student teachers loved, responsible, engaged, always staying late to help clean up after events. May 16th was a Friday. Rosewood High held its annual spring dance in the gymnasium. Amy attended with her boyfriend, Marcus Walsh, a senior headed to Oregon State on a football scholarship. The dance ended at 10 p.m. Marcus offered to walk Amy home, but she declined. Her house was only half a mile away, straight down Maple Street through a residential neighborhood where nothing bad ever happened. "I'll be fine," Amy told Marcus at 10:07 p.m., witnessed by 3 classmates. "My dad's probably still awake. I'll call you tomorrow." That was the last time anyone who loved Amy saw her alive. At 11:15 p.m., Amy's father, Robert Richardson, called Rosewood Police Department. Amy hadn't come home. The walk should have taken 15 minutes maximum. Robert had driven the route 3 times. No sign of her. At 1:23 a.m., a search dog found Amy's denim jacket in the Cascade Forest Preserve, approximately 1 mile from the school. The jacket was torn. There were signs of struggle, broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, but no Amy. Among the first responders, 24-year-old David Peterson, assistant principal at Rosewood High School, who'd helped supervise the dance that night. Peterson organized search teams, coordinated with police, stayed at the command post until dawn. When Robert Richardson collapsed from exhaustion and grief, it was Peterson who drove him home and promised they wouldn't stop looking. The search continued for weeks. The Cascade Forest was searched tree by tree. Dive teams checked nearby lakes. Helicopters flew grid patterns. But Amy Richardson had vanished. And David Peterson, the assistant principal who'd helped lead the search, knew exactly where she was. Knew he'd never let them find her. Knew he'd spend the rest of his life hiding what he'd done. For Robert and Linda Richardson, Amy's disappearance destroyed their lives. Robert, a mechanic who ran his own garage, closed the business 6 months after Amy vanished. Linda, a nurse at Rosewood Hospital, took medical leave that became permanent disability when depression made it impossible to work. Their son Michael, Amy's younger brother by 3 years, grew up in a house where grief occupied every room. Michael was 14 when Amy disappeared. He'd been playing video games in his room when she left for the dance. The last thing she'd said to him was, "Stop hogging the TV, loser," with that big sister smirk. He'd rolled his eyes. 44 years later, That was still the last thing she'd said to him. That moment, that stupid teenage interaction, was frozen in time. And Michael would give anything to have rolled his eyes at her one more time. Every May 16th, the Richardson family held a vigil at Rosewood High School. In early years, hundreds attended. Over time, crowds thinned. By the 1990s, it was often just the Richardsons and a handful of Amy's classmates. But one person attended every single vigil without fail: David Peterson. In 1985, Peterson was promoted to principal of Rosewood High School. He held the position for 35 years, building a reputation as an educator who genuinely cared about students. He established the Amy Richardson Scholarship Fund for students planning to study law. He spoke at every vigil about never giving up hope, about keeping Amy's memory alive. At the 30th anniversary vigil in 2010, Peterson stood beside Robert Richardson, now 73 years old, at the memorial plaque the town had installed. Robert broke down crying, overwhelmed by 3 decades of grief that never faded. Peterson helped him to a bench, sat beside him in the fading May sunlight. "I dream about finding her," Robert said through tears, voice hollow. "I dream about bringing her home, even if it's just her bones. At least she'd be home. At least we could bury her." Peterson's hand was on Robert's shoulder. He knew exactly where Amy was. Could end this man's suffering with a single sentence. Could tell him that Amy was buried in a remote section of Cascade Forest, 2 miles north of where her jacket was found. Could give Robert the closure he'd been begging for. "I understand," Peterson said instead, squeezing Robert's shoulder. "We'll never stop looking. I promise you." And they sat there together, the grieving father and the man who'd killed his daughter, watching the sun set over Rosewood, while Amy's bones lay in the forest, waiting to be found. In 2018, Peterson retired from Rosewood High School after 38 years of service. The school board held a ceremony honoring his legacy. They renamed the library Peterson Hall. Established the David Peterson Excellence in Education Award. His former students spoke about how he'd changed their lives. Michael Richardson, Amy's brother, now 48 and a history teacher at a neighboring school, attended the ceremony. He'd become a teacher because of Peterson. "Mr. Peterson kept Amy's memory alive," Michael told colleagues. "He made sure she mattered. That's what educators do. They make people matter." When Peterson hugged him after the ceremony, Michael felt tears in his eyes. "Thank you for everything you've done. For Amy, for all of us. You've been like family." Peterson's response was barely audible. "I wish I could have done more." What Michael didn't know, what no one knew, was that Peterson could have done more. Could have told the truth 44 years earlier. Could have spared Michael's family 4 decades of grief. Could have been anything except what he was: a coward who chose his reputation over their peace. The breakthrough that would finally destroy Peterson's facade began in 2022, when Rosewood Police Department received a grant to re-examine cold cases using modern forensic techniques. Detective Michael Santos was assigned to review the Richardson case. Among the evidence, a piece of chewing gum found near where Amy's jacket was discovered. In 1980, chewing gum wasn't considered valuable evidence, but in 2023, DNA extraction technology could recover cells from saliva on degraded samples decades old. Santos sent the gum to a private forensic lab. The lab recovered a partial DNA profile. It was entered into CODIS. No match. But in March 2024, they tried forensic genetic genealogy. The trail led to a family line with deep roots in Oregon. 3 brothers born in the 1950s. 1 deceased. 1 living in California. 1 living in Rosewood. Retired principal David Eugene Peterson. On May 10, 2024, Santos received the genealogy report. For the next 4 weeks, investigators tracked Peterson, waiting to collect discarded DNA. On June 5th, Peterson attended a Rotary Club lunch. He threw away a disposable coffee cup. Officers retrieved it, sent it for expedited analysis. On June 10th, results came back. Perfect match to the DNA from the chewing gum found near Amy Richardson's jacket 44 years earlier. The arrest warrant was signed June 11th. On June 12th, 2024, at exactly 7:23 a.m., Detective Santos and 5 officers approached David Peterson's house. And when the coffee mug shattered on the porch, when Peterson collapsed crying, "I'm so sorry," when officers found Amy's portrait in his pocket and her student ID in his wallet, when he publicly admitted to Mrs. Chen, "I killed Amy Richardson," Santos knew they had their man. As the patrol car carrying Peterson pulled away, neighbors stood in shocked silence. The reunion scheduled for June 14th was canceled. Peterson Hall at Rosewood High School would be renamed. The Amy Richardson Scholarship Fund would continue, but without Peterson's name. Because David Peterson, beloved educator and community leader, was a murderer who'd hidden his crime for 44 years while teaching children and pretending to care about a girl he'd killed. And now, finally, Amy Richardson's family would get the answers they'd waited nearly half a century to hear. The interrogation room at Oregon State Police Headquarters was designed to extract confessions. Gray concrete walls, single metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, fluorescent lights that hummed constantly, designed to wear down resistance. No windows, no clock, no escape. Just David Peterson in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed to a steel ring embedded in the table, and Detective Michael Santos sitting across from him with a folder containing 44 years of evidence and lies. Peterson had been in custody for 9 hours, booked, photographed, fingerprinted, strip-searched. The transformation from respected educator to inmate had been brutally efficient. Now he sat, slumped in the chair, face pale, eyes red from crying, looking 20 years older than the man who'd been preparing for a reunion that morning. Santos let the silence stretch. 10 minutes. 15. 20. He'd learned that silence was often more effective than questions. Let suspects sit with their guilt. Let them imagine what evidence existed. Let them talk themselves into confessions. At 23 minutes, Peterson broke. "I want to tell you where she is." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Amy, I want to tell you where I buried her." Santos opened the folder slowly, pulled out the DNA report, slid it across the table. "We already know you killed her. The chewing gum you spat out at the crime scene. Your DNA. Perfect match." Peterson stared at the document, hands trembling. Chewing gum. After 44 years. I thought I'd been so careful. I cleaned her jacket, made sure there was no evidence. But I'd been chewing gum while I waited for her. I spat it out in the bushes. "Tell me what happened to Amy Richardson." The confession came slowly, painfully, like extracting shrapnel embedded for decades. "It started in March 1980, Peterson said. He was 24, assistant principal. Amy was 17, a student he'd noticed. Smart, beautiful, mature beyond her years. He started finding excuses to talk to her. Called her into his office to discuss college applications. Stayed late when he knew debate team was practicing. I told myself I was mentoring her, helping her succeed. But that wasn't what I was doing. I was grooming her. I see that now." In April 1980, Peterson made advances, complimented her appearance, touched her shoulder inappropriately during a conversation. Amy rejected him firmly, professionally, said she was uncomfortable and would like to keep their interactions professional. "She handled it perfectly," Peterson said, tears streaming. "She was respectful, didn't make a scene, just drew a clear boundary. And I should have respected that, should have been ashamed. But I wasn't. I was angry. humiliated. May 16th, 1980. The spring dance. Peterson supervised, as required for administrators. He watched Amy dance with Marcus Walsh, watched her laugh, watched her reject him again, publicly, wordlessly, by being happy with someone her own age. When the dance ended at 10 p.m., Peterson left through the back entrance, drove to the edge of Cascade Forest, parked where he could see the path students took as a shortcut home. I told myself I just wanted to talk to her, to apologize, to make things right. But I was lying to myself. I was angry. And when Amy walked past at 10:25 p.m., taking the forest path instead of the main road, I followed her. The path was dark, isolated, no houses, no witnesses. Peterson caught up to Amy about half a mile into the forest, called her name. She turned, surprised, but not alarmed. It was Mr. Peterson, the assistant principal, someone she trusted. I tried to talk to her, told her I couldn't stop thinking about her, that we had a connection. She backed away, told me I was making her uncomfortable, said she was going to report me to Principal Hayes. That's when I grabbed her. Santos's jaw tightened. What did you do? Peterson's hands weren't just trembling now, they were clawing at the table, fingernails scraping metal. She fought, harder than I expected. She scratched my face, kicked me, screamed. I put my hand over her mouth. She bit me, drew blood. I panicked, wrapped my arm around her neck, squeezed. Just wanted her to stop screaming, to stop fighting. How long did you squeeze? I don't know. A minute. Maybe 2. When I let go, she wasn't breathing. The room fell silent except for the fluorescent lights humming and Peterson's ragged breathing. Santos forced himself to remain professional when every instinct screamed to reach across the table and finish what Amy had started 44 years ago. What did you do with her body? Peterson's voice dropped to barely audible. I dragged her deeper into the forest, 2 miles north of the path. There's a ravine, dense undergrowth. I buried her there, shallow grave, covered it with branches and leaves. Then I went back to where we'd struggled, tore her jacket, scattered some buttons, made it look like she'd been attacked by a stranger, left the jacket where searchers would find it. Then I went home, showered, went to bed, and the next morning, when her father called the police, I joined the search. Santos stood abruptly, walked to the corner, pressed his forehead against the cold concrete wall. When he turned back, his voice was ice. You helped search for her. You organized volunteers. You stood at the command post giving orders, and you knew exactly where she was. Peterson nodded, face buried in his cuffed hands. I couldn't leave town. That would have been suspicious. So I stayed. I became principal. I established a scholarship in her name. I attended every vigil. I thought if I did enough good, maybe it would balance what I'd done. That's not atonement. That's torture. You tortured the Richardson family for 44 years. I know. I've known for 44 years. Robert Richardson sat next to me at vigils, cried on my shoulder, thanked me for keeping Amy's memory alive, and I couldn't tell him. I was too much of a coward. Santos pulled out evidence photos. Amy's student ID recovered from Peterson's wallet, her senior portrait from his pocket. You kept pieces of her, trophies. Peterson shook his head violently. Not trophies. Reminders. Punishments. Every time I opened my wallet for 44 years, I saw her face, 17 years old, dead because of me. I didn't keep them as trophies. I kept them as penance. Penance would have been confessing, giving her family closure. You chose 44 years of lies instead. Peterson looked up, tears streaming, something like relief in his eyes. I'm confessing now. I'll show you where she is. Let me give them that. It's the only thing I can still give them. while Peterson sat in the interrogation room mapping coordinates of Amy's burial location, a tactical team was executing a search warrant at his house on Oak Street. Patricia Peterson, his wife of 40 years, stood on the lawn demanding answers. A family liaison officer explained her husband had been arrested for murder. Patricia's screams echoed through the neighborhood. David is an educator. He's dedicated his life to children. This is insane. Inside the house, investigators moved systematically. The living room was filled with teaching awards, photos of students, framed newspaper articles about Peterson's retirement. The bedroom was ordinary, but in Peterson's home office, in a safe deposit box he kept in his desk drawer, Detective Sarah Chen found what they were looking for. The box was locked. Officers used bolt cutters. Inside, a class ring. Amy Richardson's class ring. Gold with a blue stone. Engraved with RHS 1981. She would have received it junior year, would have worn it until graduation. But she never made it to senior year because Peterson killed her. Beneath the ring, a handwritten note on yellowed paper, dated May 17, 1980, one day after Amy's murder. I killed Amy Richardson last night. I never meant to hurt her. I was just so angry, so humiliated. I can never undo this. The only way forward is to make sure she's never forgotten. I'll dedicate my career to her memory. Maybe God will forgive me. Forgive me, Amy. Please forgive me. Chen photographed the ring and note, hands shaking with rage. When she emerged from the house with the evidence, Patricia was sitting in a patrol car, face buried in her hands. An officer had shown her the charges, the confession, the evidence. Patricia's world was collapsing in real time. 40 years, Patricia whispered to no one. I've been married to him for 40 years. How did I not know? The recovery operation in Cascade Forest began at dawn on June 15, 2024, guided by Peterson's detailed confession. The forest was closed to public access. Forensic teams from 3 counties assembled, cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar. And at the forest entrance, barely holding himself upright, stood Robert Richardson. Detective Santos had called him 2 days earlier with news of Peterson's arrest. Robert's reaction had been silence, complete, devastating silence. Then, finally, David Peterson? Our principal? The man who organized Amy's scholarship fund? Now Robert stood at the edge of Cascade Forest, 87 years old, leaning on a walker, insisting on being present when they recovered his daughter. Michael Richardson, Amy's brother, stood beside him, one hand on his father's shoulder. Both men staring at the forest that had hidden Amy for 44 years. Santos approached. You don't have to be here for this. It could take days. Robert shook his head, eyes fixed on the forest. I've been waiting 44 years. I'm not leaving now. I'm bringing my daughter home. The forensic teams entered the forest at 7:34 a.m., following Peterson's coordinates, 2 miles north of the original search area. A ravine thick with undergrowth. The dogs hit on the location within an hour. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed remains approximately 3 feet below the surface. Recovery began at 10:15 a.m. Slow, methodical, documenting everything. By 2:47 p.m., they'd uncovered enough to confirm human remains. Female, approximate age late teens, buried in a shallow grave, covered with branches and forest debris that had decomposed over 44 years. At 4:32 p.m., a forensic technician found something that made her pause. She called Santos over, pointed to what they'd uncovered. Fabric, denim, Amy's jeans, still partially intact after 44 years in the soil. And in the pocket, protected by the fabric, something small and metal. A locket. Heart-shaped. Silver. Engraved on the back. To Amy, love Mom and Dad, Christmas 1979. Santos carried the locket to where Robert and Michael waited, placed it carefully in Robert's trembling hands. We found her, Santos said quietly. "Amy's coming home." Robert stared at the locket, then at the forest, where forensic teams were still working. His legs gave out. Michael caught him, held the 87-year-old man, while he wept for the daughter he'd lost at 17, searched for across 44 years, and finally, impossibly, found. "She was here the whole time," Robert gasped between sobs. "Every time we held vigils at the school, every time we searched the forest, she was right here. And David Peterson knew. He stood next to me at those vigils, told me never to give up hope. And he knew." The news exploded across Oregon, and then nationally. Beloved principal arrested. Victim's body recovered after 44 years. Killer organized scholarship in her name, attended memorials. The story had everything that made true crime simultaneously compelling and horrifying. In Rosewood, the reaction was visceral. Rosewood High School was surrounded by media trucks. The school board held an emergency meeting. Peterson Hall, the library renamed in his honor 6 years earlier, would be renamed Amy Richardson Memorial Library. The David Peterson Excellence in Education Award was dissolved. His name was removed from every plaque, every award, every photograph on school property. Patricia Peterson filed for divorce on June 20th. Their adult children released a statement. "We are devastated. The man we knew as our father doesn't exist. We stand with the Richardson family." Michael Richardson, Amy's brother, held a press conference on June 22nd. He was 58 now, gray-haired, exhausted by 4 decades of grief. "David Peterson was my hero," Michael said, voice shaking. "I became a teacher because of him, because he kept my sister's memory alive. Now I learn he was the one who killed her, that he used her scholarship fund as cover for his crime, that every vigil, every memorial, every kind word was a lie. How do you process that level of betrayal? The question hung unanswered because there was no good answer. Trust, once shattered, doesn't heal. It leaves scars that never fade." Amy Richardson's funeral was held on July 12, 2024, at Rosewood Community Church, the same church where her family had held hope-filled vigils for 44 years. The church overflowed with mourners, some who'd known Amy, others who'd grown up hearing her story. All gathered to finally lay her to rest. Robert Richardson sat in the front pew, barely holding himself together. Linda, his wife, had died in 2018 from Alzheimer's, never knowing justice would come. Michael sat beside his father, one arm around the old man's shoulders, both men staring at Amy's casket. Pastor David Michaels delivered the eulogy with barely contained rage. "Amy was stolen from us twice, once in 1980 when her life was taken, and again every day for 44 years when the man who killed her walked free, pretending to honor her memory while hiding the truth." Michael spoke during the service, his voice breaking multiple times. "The last thing Amy said to me was, 'Stop hogging the TV, loser.' I was 14, playing video games, being an annoying little brother. She rolled her eyes at me, and then she left for the dance, and I never saw her again. For 44 years, that moment has been frozen. That stupid teenage interaction. I'd give anything to have her roll her eyes at me one more time." The burial took place at Rosewood Cemetery. Amy's casket was lowered into the ground beside her mother's grave. Robert stood at the edge, leaning heavily on Michael, watching his daughter finally laid to rest. When mourners began filing past, Robert remained motionless, unwilling to leave. Sheriff Santos approached, stood beside him in silence. Finally, Robert spoke. "David Peterson sat next to me at the 30th anniversary vigil. I cried. Told him I dreamed about bringing Amy home, and he knew where she was. Could have ended my suffering with one sentence, chose not to. How do you forgive that?" Santos had no answer, because the truth was, that some things can't be forgiven. Some betrayals are too deep. Some wounds don't heal. The trial of David Peterson began on October 14, 2024. Despite his detailed confession, Oregon law required formal proceedings. Peterson's court-appointed attorney, Jennifer Walsh, had an impossible task. The confession was voluntary. The DNA was irrefutable. The body had been recovered exactly where Peterson said it would be. Walsh's strategy focused on Peterson's 44 years of service, the lives he'd changed, his genuine remorse. It fell completely flat. Lead prosecutor Daniel Morrison dismantled it methodically. The defendant claims remorse, but let's examine his actions. He murdered a 17-year-old student. He buried her in a forest. He helped search for her while knowing where she was. He established a scholarship in her name as cover. He attended 44 memorials and comforted her family. He kept her student ID and class ring as souvenirs. That's not remorse. That's sustained psychological torture disguised as atonement. The evidence was devastating. The DNA match, the confession video, the student ID and class ring recovered from his possession, the locket found with Amy's remains, photographs of the burial site. The most powerful testimony came from Robert Richardson. 87 years old, using a walker, his voice shook, but his words cut like razors. David Peterson didn't just kill my daughter. He killed my wife. Linda died in 2018 believing Amy's killer would never be found. That guilt consumed her for 38 years, until Alzheimer's took even her memories. Peterson attended Linda's funeral, hugged me, told me she was with Amy now. And all I could think was that this monster was offering comfort when he was the reason Linda died broken-hearted. Robert turned to face Peterson directly. You sat next to me at the 30th anniversary vigil. I told you I dreamed about bringing Amy home. You squeezed my shoulder, said we'd never stop looking. And you knew. You knew exactly where she was. You could have ended my suffering, given my wife closure before Alzheimer's took her. But you chose 44 more years of torture instead. The courtroom was silent. Peterson sat at the defense table, head down, shoulders shaking, destroyed by decades of guilt, crashing down simultaneously. When given the opportunity to address the court, Peterson stood. His voice was barely audible. I have no excuse. Amy rejected me, threatened to report me, and I killed her. Then I spent 44 years being too cowardly to confess. I thought if I became a good principal, if I helped enough students, somehow it would balance what I'd done. I was wrong. Nothing balances this. I destroyed the Richardson family. I destroyed my own family. I'm sorry doesn't mean anything, but it's all I have left. Robert stared at Peterson with cold hatred. I hope you live a long time in prison. I hope every day you wake up knowing that all those students you helped will have lives Amy never got. Because you killed her when she was 17. That's what her life was worth to you. Your reputation. Judge Patricia Morrison delivered the sentence on October 17, 2024. Mr. Peterson, you are sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. You took a student's life to protect your secret. You let her family suffer for 44 years. You received honors while hiding murder. You will die behind bars. And you will be remembered not as an educator, but as a predator who hid behind a desk for 4 decades. Court adjourned. Peterson showed no reaction as officers led him away in shackles. The man who'd taught thousands of students disappeared into the prison system, stripped of everything except the memory of what he'd done. David Peterson died in prison on March 8, 2026, 18 months after his conviction. He was 70. The official cause was suicide. Inmates reported he'd stopped eating weeks earlier, had given away his belongings, had written letters to the Richardson family that were never sent. Robert Richardson was notified of Peterson's death by Santos. His reaction was a long silence. Then, "Good. I hope Amy was waiting for him." Rosewood High School held no memorial. Peterson's name remained erased. The awards dissolved. His legacy reduced to a single line in records. David Eugene Peterson, Assistant Principal 1978 to 1985. Principal 1985-2018. Dismissed, convicted of murder. Amy Richardson. Memorial Library opened on September 1, 2026, in the space formerly known as Peterson Hall. The dedication ceremony was attended by hundreds. Michael Richardson spoke about his sister, about justice delayed but finally served, about a community learning to heal. Robert Richardson died peacefully in his sleep on November 3, 2026, at age 88. He was buried between his wife and daughter in Rosewood Cemetery. At his funeral, Pastor Michaels spoke about a man who'd never given up, who'd lived long enough to see justice, who'd finally brought his daughter home. Robert waited 44 years for answers. He got them. They didn't heal him. But at least he knew. At least Amy came home. That's more than many families ever get. Michael Richardson continues teaching history at Willamette High School. He speaks to his students every year on May 16th about Amy, about trusting but verifying, about how evil can hide behind kindness. "My sister was killed by someone she trusted," he tells them. "Someone the whole town trusted. That doesn't mean you should trust no one. It means you should trust carefully. And if something feels wrong, speak up." Amy tried to speak up. I wish someone had listened. The Amy Richardson Scholarship Fund continues, now administered by the Richardson Family Foundation. It's awarded annually to students pursuing law degrees, keeping Amy's dream alive for young people who'll get the chance she never had. On warm summer evenings, families gather at Rosewood Park, where a memorial bench was installed in Amy's honor. Children play. Teenagers study. Life continues, because that's what life does. It continues, despite tragedy, despite betrayal, despite justice that comes too late to heal. And in Cascade Forest, where Amy Richardson spent 44 years hidden in the undergrowth, there's now a memorial marker at the trailhead. It reads, "Amy Marie Richardson, 1963-1980, honor student, debate captain, beloved daughter and sister, found at last, never forgotten. Rest in peace." Justice came late to Rosewood, but it came. And beneath the Oregon soil, where families now hike and children explore, there's a small plaque that marks where Amy was found. Not where she died, where she was found. Because in the end, that's what mattered. She was lost. And then she was found. And the man who'd hidden her for 44 years died alone in a prison cell, stripped of legacy, stripped of respect, stripped of everything except the truth, that he was a murderer who'd hidden behind a desk and a smile for 4 decades. And finally, impossibly, been caught.